Welcome to today's Hump Day Hangout with Fire Engineering. We got a couple great guests. We're going to cover a topic today that often isn't covered: the role and responsibilities of the executive officer. We're talking about number two in the fire department, the chief that in some departments is an assistant chief, some is a deputy, but basically we're talking about the hand of the chief, the number two, the chief executive officer. We got two great guests today, and of course, we have the boss, Editor-in-Chief Bobby Halton on, which we're thankful for him stopping on, especially with FDIC coming up in April. But let me start off with PJ introducing our two great guests.
Thanks, Frank. Thanks, Chief, for another month of this great show of serving with you and Frank. Today, we get to introduce two friends. I have two bios. But anybody in the fire service really doesn't need to hear these bios because everybody knows Brian and everybody knows Justin. They're extremely familiar faces with the fire engineering family, from training and education, FDIC instructors, as well as what they currently do in their full-time career. So Justin, as we know, is a good friend of mine and Frank's. He's currently the assistant chief of New Haven Fire Department. As I mentioned, he teaches across the country. He's an FDIC instructor. He's a co-author of the Tactical Perspectives DVD series, as well as many other things here in the state of Connecticut, across the country. And we have Brian. Brian's a 21 student of the fire service. He's currently serving as the assistant chief of operations in training. So we got two roles there, which is never easy. He's also a very active instructor teaching the Tri-County Training Consortium, as well as the ISFSI. And Brian also, he's authored many articles. He's taught many seminars across the country, as well as a very popular face at FDIC. So I'm pretty happy and proud to introduce two of these great individuals who I consider both friends and mentors, and especially Justin. He's got a lot of phone calls from me, and hey, what do you think about this? And he's one of the most analytical fire officers that I know. And he's the type of guy that you need sometimes in your corner, because we always think of things one way. Well, except for Justin. Justin will think of things 6 different ways. And sometimes that's what we need. So I'm proud to introduce both now. And I'm not a number 2 guy. I guess I am at the training academy, but I was a number 4 guy. So I know that that's difficult. And the higher you go up in the chain, it's even more difficult. So I'm interested in learning from the two of them today, and kind of interject a little bit. And this should be a little fun as well, because we got a fun group today.
Well, let's start off with Brian. What's it like? What training really prepared you for the role of being the hand of the chief?
It's tough. Probably know my fire chief, Jim Silvernail. So, working with him is good. But it's difficult, right? So, we're friends outside of work, but at work, I have to sometimes execute his orders that sometimes may or may not agree with. And so that makes it tough having that friendship. In terms of training and education, I think it's just a lot of experience. It's how do you deliver that message in a palatable way that may not be the most desirable to the troops, but it's what's going to be good for the organization. And I think that's a hard thing going from the company level. We were talking earlier before we started about the short-term gains versus long-term benefits. And I think when you get in these positions, you have to look at the organization, what it's going to be from the decisions you make today, the impact they're going to have not tomorrow, but in 5 and 10 years for your organization. And I think that's probably one of the hardest parts of this job for myself, is making sure that those decisions are thought out and that they're going to be positive impacts, not maybe tomorrow, but long-term.
Now, Justin, I've had the pleasure of seeing you since you were a recruit firefighter and go up through the ranks. And one thing that I think everybody's got to realize is most people don't see themselves in the number 2 position. Everybody sees themselves as the chief of department. And whether it's number 2 or the chief, I think people have to realize that preparing for that position, it really starts at the kitchen. It really starts at the sink and doing the things that are a little bit above and beyond. I remember talking to Jay Jonas from FDNY, and one of the things that he said that he regretted was at Howard Blythe's firehouse, Cross Bronx Expressway. I walked into the kitchen. I think you were with me. And there was a Sharpie pen with 2 firefighters' name on the sink. And I go, what's that? And they go, when you're a probationary firefighter in this house, you own the sink, so you get to put your name on it. And Chief Jonas said it's one thing he regretted is he didn't have a picture of it. So your career, no matter where you start off, doing a little bit extra, taking responsibility for that housework, making sure your tools are clean and things of that nature, prepare you for having credibility as a leader. But I got to tell one quick story about Justin that I think was key to his credibility. Is Justin came out of the academy. He went to the busiest firehouse, truck 4 and engine 6, and he really made his bones. And then when he got promoted, once he made his bones, then he went to the squad, which is our special operations company in the city. And he really excelled in special operations. And when he was going to get promoted, he had a choice to stay there or not stay there. And he came to me and we had a conversation, and I said, the worst thing you could do is stay there. Don't stay on the squad. Go back to a company that's going to get fires first due, where you're going to be given first due size up reports, make your bones, stay there for a year, and then go to the squad or the rescue. And people are going to respect you, and it's going to build your credibility. So Justin, why don't you start with that? Because I think that decision really, because you're somebody I know who's gone to law school, and most people don't respect lawyers. So you actually earned.
I don't either. Don't worry.
Years in command officers. So tell us a little bit about that decision process.
So, yeah, Frank, thanks. Where do I want to begin? So I did go to Frank when I got promoted, and there was a discussion about me staying on the squad, and we did come to the consensus that going back to a busy company was going to be much better for my future. I think Captain Morris, now Chief Morris, Rex, however you know him, he said famously in the documentary, it takes forever to earn a good reputation. You could lose it really quick. However he said it, I'm paraphrasing. And it's really true, right? So you start building your reputation on day one in the academy. I don't care if you come in with or without experience. I came from another department to this department. And I remember Chief Grant at the time looked at me and said, forget everything you know, we're going to teach you how to be a fireman here, right? That was opening day, first day, right? And whether it's politically correct or not, that's exactly what he said to me. And it always resonated. So I always walked into everything, blank slate. And then as I moved up, I thought it was good to be able to work on the reputation first, and then everything else kind of follows. I think the people that I've seen have trouble have expected the reputation to just get created without them doing any work. And, they either ride the coattails of their first officer, a family member who was in the fire service, or because they took a bunch of classes, they should automatically garnish respect. And it's not really how it works. And as a piggyback to that, and Frank, you and I have discussed this, PJ's discussed this, we've had this talk, it's really hard to play catch up. So if you out promote yourself, it's really hard to go back and then try to have your reputation catch up. I found it to be true that if you just treat everybody equally, fairly, do what you want, kind of be the person to not give an order that you wouldn't follow yourself. That resonates with people. And I think that's helped me kind of springboard to where I am now. I just had a talk with a good friend of mine. Some days, I wish somebody talked me out of moving up this quickly. I do miss going on the calls. I miss going out the door every day and hanging out at the kitchen table. There's pros and cons to everything. But I think anybody needs to understand that it's never too late to start building a reputation, but understand that if you're new in the fire service, it starts on day one. You can't undo what you do as you go, right? You have to kind of almost at times start back from zero again and follow your heart in a way. Let's face it, Frank. I mean, I talk pretty bluntly, that. When I came on the job, Frank was getting thrown out of appellate court, and everybody was like, don't hang out with that guy, he's over here, he's a courtroom loser, right? And I stuck by Frank's side, and we've been very close friends since day one. And a lot of people were kind of scoffing him off because at that point Judge Sotomayor told him to pack his stuff and hit the road, right? So stick by the people that stick by you, and it goes a long way.
Ryan, in your role, especially with Chief Silvernail, who I think is a great guy, but I don't work for him. And I will tell you this, I've never met any chief that's completely 100% popular. That only happens at your retirement party where nobody has detractors. So whether you're Chief Brunacini or Chief Silvernail, you're always going to have detractors. And then I want to get Bobby and PJ into this too, but how do you fill that role as kind of being the buffer between the personnel and the chief of the department, because the number two job, you're really kind of the hand of the chief, and you really have to communicate their vision, not so much your vision. Can you kind of explain that?
Yeah. So a couple things, I'll dovetail into what Justin was saying. You know, I came from another department. So I came to Kirkwood 3 years ago, and I had no reputation here other than, you know, firehouse rumors of, you know, hey, he's a good guy, he's a jerk, whatever, from my previous department. So I specifically remember, you know, coming into the office and, you know, I treated myself as a new employee. And I know that sounds probably weird, but if you think about it, like, how does that work? So office, we have coffee. Who makes the coffee? The new guy. That was me. Who takes the trash out from the office? That was me. And, you know, to your point, you know, you said it was, you're never above any task, you know, even to this day, you know, come Friday, you know, come to the Kirkwood admin, you're going to see me vacuuming and taking trash out. Not because it's required, but if I expect the guys to take the trash out and vacuum their space, how can I hold them accountable when I don't do it to my own space? Right. So
you just don't want them looking at your desk. So
that's probably fact too. That's fact too. So, but I think that's important, right? I think, you know, and you know, actions speak louder than words. We've heard that a million times, and it's the truth is, you know, you're never beyond any task in the fire service. And, you know, it doesn't matter what rank you achieve or where you want to find yourself, but never assign something that you don't continue to do or wouldn't do. As it relates to, like you said, you know, working for the fire chief, you know, I think my job, one of my biggest jobs is going around to the stations. We don't currently have a battalion chief. So, you know, I go around, hear what the rumblings are from the guys, hear what's going on, spread the message, try to make the message palatable, explain things, you know, and the biggest thing that everyone wants is not so much that you're going to change, but that they can be heard. And I think that goes a long way is, you know, hey, the chief at least heard what I had to say. Like, he may not change his opinion and we may not change the direction that the department's going, but at least through the validity of being heard, I've at least had my say. And I think that goes a long way with people, especially firefighters who typically are type A personalities. And, you know, while what I said is the best, it's got to be, right? Because I'm a firefighter. So, and you're right. I mean, there's days I want to, you know, wring the fire chief's neck because I don't agree. But at the end of the day, he's still the fire chief. And, you know, and we've had discussions and literally not agreed on a lot of things. And walk out at 4 o'clock or 5 o'clock that night when we leave work, and, you know, we're still friends. But, you know, that's the good part about it, is being able to separate that a little bit.
PJ?
Sorry, I was muted there. Yeah, because that's a tight balance. And, you know, my position as the deputy chief for training, I was fourth in command of the department. I was still in the union. The chief and assistant chief are not in the union, and the 2 deputies were in the union. But yet we worked in the chief's office. So balancing that role of being a union member with the firefighters and the line officers, but also being to carrying out the chief's mission on a daily basis, it was a very difficult tightrope to walk, because you have to, you know, you have to walk the walk and you have to do what's right for the membership, but you also have to carry out the chief's missions. And that was probably one of the hardest things that I found in my role, is because, you know, we're always taught, you come in the firehouse, you sit down, you shut up, you keep your mouth shut, and you do your job. And then having to go into the chief's office many days, closing the door and saying, having that, what I always call the courageous conversation of what I don't agree with and where I think you're wrong, and telling the chief that is a challenge. And I always had the impression that I wasn't respected by the 2 chiefs that I worked for as deputy chief, because I would have those conversations. I wasn't afraid to have those courageous conversations, because then when the door opened and I went back out on the floor, I carried out their orders. And sometimes their opinion would change a little bit. Sometimes it wouldn't change. But my job was to carry out their orders, as it had to do with training and safety. And then as we progressed years down the road, both those chiefs have had conversations and they both appreciated those conversations, even though many times I walked out the door quickly because I didn't know what was going to get thrown at me as I kind of transversed that threshold. But at the end of the day, they actually respected me more because I wasn't afraid to have those conversations, because it was always respectful. It was always appropriate. The door was always closed, and it was just one-on-one or the other deputy chief having that conversation. And then when we went out to the floor, it was a united front. And I would leave my opinion if I disagreed in the chief's office. You know, I would have a couple outlets, couple friends you have those discussions with that are not from your department, but that's a very difficult position to take, especially when you're in a union position, or in a volunteer department where you're a volunteer officer and you receive that position because you're voted into that position. So very different roles that are challenging for a lot of our viewers today and a lot of our friends that work in those positions.
You're muted, Frank.
Bobby, please weigh in on this. I saw you eating, so I figured I'd definitely send it to you.
Cheetos, perfect food. It's really, you know, in the food pyramid, it's right after pizza. So there's that. So well, thank you. I think, you know, what's interesting about the XO position, because people use deputy assistant, you know, all over the place. But when you're the XO, it's a fascinating place to be, right? You got to be the sounding board for your boss. So you got to be the guy that like brings them the bad news, like, you know, and then you got to be that person who can be that filter for them so that they don't get overwhelmed with, you know, the minutia, right? So it's a really interesting job to have. I was blessed to work under a fellow named Robert Ortega as his XO in Albuquerque, and did that for 6 years. And he was a gentleman's fire chief, wonderful guy, brilliant at strategy, brilliant at running the organization and all the politics and the rest of it. But we would disagree, you know, on things from time to time. And Robert used to call it loyal insubordination. And he would always tell me, Alton, just do what's best for the guys and gals in the street. You know what I mean? And then explain it to me as best you can so I don't lose my job in front of the council. You know, and we did. So we had a wonderful relationship. But you had to be, what's interesting, you have to have a relationship to where when you go into your fire chief's office and you close that door and it's just the two of you, you have to be able to be brutally honest with each other. You know what I mean? Just brutally honest. And that's something that if you get an XO position, you've got to nurture. And then generally the XO, depending on the size of the organization, will have the operations division under them. And that's where, you know, the work happens and where everybody wants to be and where all the controversy comes from, right? You know, McCarthy wants to be on the squad, or he wants to be on the tower, or, you know, Zaitz wants to, you know, he wants to be at 13s, and Norwood's been there forever, but everybody knows Norwood's just, you know, retired in place. You know what I mean? So
He just wants to burn dollhouses. He doesn't want to fight fires.
Yeah, he doesn't. Yeah. He's just burning. He's got a grudge against Barbie and Ken. You know, so that's why we gave him that little Chiefs car, that little pink Chiefs car that's got a battery in it. You could just kidding. Wouldn't that be cool? So what's interesting about it, it's a wickedly complex relationship, and what's really awesome is if you get a good relationship going. I was very blessed with Robert. He was just a great human being, just a flat out great human being. And the entire command staff was just, Robert Montoya was another. It was like it was Bobby, Robert, and Robert. So my counterpart on the administrative side was a guy named Robert Montoya, who was just a wonderful guy. So every organization has relationships, and what was great about our situation was nobody was the third wheel, right? Like the neat thing about Chief Ortega was he was like a really good parent. He never showed that kind of favoritism. You know what I mean? Like I was his XO, but that was my job. It didn't make me any more important, loved, you know, than the rest of the guys and gals that worked underneath him. So he was really good at that crescendo. But I've seen places where XOs were not loyally insubordinate, but backstabbing bad guys. You know what I mean? Where they want to take their bosses down, and that can be a really rough situation. So how the XOs get selected, I think, as we're talking in broad terms here, is something that if you're going to take a job as a fire chief, or if you're moving into that position, or if you're talking about the structure of your organization, so some staff positions just absolutely have to be at the purview of the person who you work with, right? Like, and some organizations don't have that. So let's see, Facebook, Lincoln Bureau, I agree 100%. Great advice from all of you. You have to be, let's see, I got to go to the chat room.
Humble.
Humble. Yeah. Well, humility is my greatest characteristic. That's the thing I'm most proud of, is my humility. It's great. It's an old joke. McCarthy's laughing right away. He's like, yeah. Right. No, so you got to be able to listen, learn much more. So you're right. But so I think what's an interesting conversation to have, though, is if you're in your organization, how people get there. Like if it's a promoted position, you could end up with a staff that has a radically different worldview than you have. And that can be tough. Sometimes, like, people always talk about Lincoln had, the cabinet. Yeah. And he didn't listen to any of them, by the way, just so people know. And he put him there so he could keep his eye on him, because he didn't want Stewart and the rest of them out there. Yeah. I mean, there's a halo effect around old Abe, and that's a good thing, right? But, he wasn't Washington. He was a great guy, super guy. Got his portrait in my office. I love the guy, absolutely love the guy. But, he built that intentionally, knowing what he was coming into, right? He was nobody's fool. He was brilliant. And I think what the XO has to be able to do is be the counterbalance to the chief, right? Like, Alan's counterbalance when he was in Phoenix was a guy who was the polar opposite of Alan. And I was very different from Chief Ortega. And that's a good thing. Like, we were not mirror images, we were really different cats, and that's a good thing. So I think, when you're going into one of these positions, you got to look at the constructs of it. You got to look at the roles and responsibilities. Some organizations, the XO has tremendous freedom, and in others it's much more constrained. But everybody's point earlier, where on key issues, you've got to be united, right? In other words, when the boss makes a key decision, you got to come out and support it. You can agree to disagree on minor things. You know what I mean? Like, I'm going to throw a stupid thing out there because nobody would ever do this, but there's places where the fire trucks aren't red. I've heard about it. It's unbelievable. I know nobody believes me, but I've heard about it. And obviously those people are insane. They should be just, they should be just kicked out of America, but they exist. So you could be vocal about that, because it doesn't matter, right? It flat out doesn't matter what color the trucks are. And that's the fun kind of stuff that you can, and you ought to have some of that with your boss or your XO, you know what I mean? But beyond that, it gets sporty. You know what I mean? You can't on the big things. I would never have a freaking lawyer. I'm just kidding, Jeff. But that's a great attribute to have, though. I mean, his boss has an attorney there, so he knows he can speak. He knows he can write. He knows he can, he knows he has certain skill sets that are really important in an XO. Because if you're the XO, you got to be willing to go before, I'm sure, Justin, you go to counsel. Brian, you go to counsel from time to time for the boss. Yeah, that's a heavy load, right? You say the wrong thing in a council meeting, holy cow! You're on the 5 o'clock news. You know what I mean? So it's a big deal. It's a big deal, and I think that the role of the XO is probably it's everybody wants to catch the car, the dog that catches the car, but the XO is kind of like, the dog that's behind the fence that you just get to run along. It's kind of safe. You know what I mean? There's no way you're going to catch the car, but you put on a hell of a show. You know what I mean? So I loved it. I mean, I worked for probably one of the finest men I've ever known. I worked for a guy that me and almost everybody else in that department would have taken a bullet for the guy. He was that guy. He was that good a chief. I mean, he was that good a chief. So, and I think, that's kind of the problem for the XO. Like, Brian works for that Silvernail guy. Holy, can you imagine that?
Get him out of here.
And by the way, Jim is now on the Fire Engineering FDIC Advisory Board. Chief Silvernail is. And I heard a rumor that this I can't never get the name right. Zaitz. He's
Every time it's always something
he's going to
different.
be keynoting in 2023. So way to go there.
Well deserved.
Yeah, and he's also the vice president of the Hair Club for Men. So we've got that going.
Got it going on. And a lot
I'm
of
not
good,
just a
good
member.
attributes.
I'm not just the owner. I'm a member. I just tease.
So Frank, I'll throw this out there. I'll throw it to Brian first. Brian, we see a lot of articles and training and education on, becoming the chief, and that's all balanced on being the chief of the department. However, I think being a number 2 of a department is more challenging, and we don't see a lot of information out there. So what advice do you have now to some future assistant chiefs or number 2s or XOs, as Chief Walton mentioned, on becoming that position or achieving that position? We know some of the challenges, but what do you see you want to educate those listening today on what you can do to achieve that, and advice?
Yeah, so it's a non-glorious position. I mean, you're going to do a ton of work and get 0 credit. And I don't mean that being a negative way. I'm not saying like Chief Silverdale's not a good guy, but it's, everything that's a positive for the fire department, the fire chief is going to be right there to take the credit for it. And everything that's negative, you're going to be right there to take the blame for it. And that's, I think, Justin can correct me if that's not the truth, but that's at least been my experiences. When something goes wrong, it's going to be pointing right to the operations. And when something goes right, it's because the fire chief made it work. And that's not bad. That's just probably the reality of the fire service. I think the other part of it too is that you just have to be willing to have, like you were saying, courageous conversations and have those discussions and knowing how far you can push your fire chief to the point to where you have to come back and say, okay, that's enough before, to that loyal insubordination turns into, hey, you're terminated insubordination. And I think I've come pretty close a few times with good Jim Silvernail, to where, I was probably on the verge of, I got fired for 45 minutes one day. He always gives me trouble about it. There was a 45-minute furlough period. I was fired one day and he's like, all right, I need you back. You're rehired. But I think those things, in terms of, what attributes, training, education, and those things, it's one of those jobs, the assistant chief, what I do is operations and training. It's, you have to have a passion for training. You have to have a passion for operations, and you have to be willing to put the time and effort in and the hours to do the work that you want to see the organization benefit. I'm right now I'm in the middle of a project for nozzles, and with, working with the committee and all the work that's going on with that. I know it sounds petty, but the chance of me having a nozzle in my hand, as much as I would absolutely love to, is probably slim and none. But I know the benefit to the organization that we're going to see when we put this nozzle hose package together is going to change the department. And, that is exciting for me. So the excitement of, 10, 15 years ago, going on a working fire, making a push down a hallway, has now transitioned to making purchases that are going to benefit the organization. And you have to have that kind of mindset and passion change to take one of these admin positions, because those are the wins you're going to have. It's not going to be, hey, we had a great working fire, we made a grab, or we stopped it to a 1-bedroom. Those aren't going to happen, at least in my world, anymore. And so you have to look for, okay, at the end of the day, someday I'll retire. And hopefully when I retire, hopefully 20 years from now, Kirkwood will look back and be like, man, that guy made a great impact, and the legacy that you leave, because you made the place a better place.
Justin, one of the things that I think a lot of kind of gets missed about the assistant chief role out there is it seems like operations has a fast track, and training for that matter has a fast track to that chief's role. But to be a really good assistant chief, you have to understand and love process a little bit. The stuff that's not as cool, the stuff that, not the operational role, the administrative role, and having that law degree, I think, is a benefit to the chief. Can you explain how understanding process and understanding kind of how to slow things down a little bit? Because I see a lot of chiefs, especially when it comes to labor management, a lot of times they make mistakes just because they move too quick, because they're in that kind of operational role all the time. Can you talk a little bit about process?
Sure, it's not the glorious stuff, right? I mean, when you get up here, you have to accept the fact that your risk of injury goes up strictly from paper cuts and paper clips and things like that. It's not, getting the glory anymore. When it comes to process, I think there's a lot of misnomers, right? So when you're a firefighter, you're sitting at the table, you're looking at the union, or you're looking at, your group of friends, or you're looking at your firehouse, and you're thinking to yourself, man, I could do better, right? And why don't they just fire that guy? Or how come that guy is not suspended? Or how come, we're waiting on these nozzles that, have been sitting here and nobody's doing anything? And everything takes a lot of time. And that's one thing that I had this talk with a friend of mine who just got promoted to basically the number 2 position, similar role in a smaller department. I was like, buddy, patience are going to be the key to your success. You can't get frustrated. So there's a couple things you have to accept, right? Number one is that when you're in this role, you have to deal with a lot of other people, and you're dealing with other agencies, other departments, other areas. Like Bobby brought up, you might be going before a council. Their meeting might be in 3 weeks, and you need this now, but you have to be patient and wait out the 3 weeks, right? And the guys in the line don't pay attention when the city council meeting is, so they're yelling, "Why isn't this done yet?" Right? There's union work that has to be done. You could be the chief that slams your fist down and says you're suspended for 3 days, and then union comes in and completely undermines you, and you have achieved nothing, right? So if you're able to go through the process and say, no, we're going to afford the person Weingarten rights, and then we're going to do a Loudermill hearing, then we're going to do a discipline hearing. Well, that one, no show, no call to the firehouse because the guy wrote the wrong date on the calendar, his wife forgot to wake him up, turns into a 30-day event, and everybody's sitting there saying, what's taking so long? If you're patient, you'll get it right. When you slam your fist and say, that's it, you're suspended, don't come into work, you're just looking like you don't know what you're doing, right? And that's where a lot of people go wrong. With that, I work for an unbelievable guy, John Alston, right? I mean, he lets me kind of run with whatever he gives me, and then if I take on more, then he's never upset about it, right? And that's kind of in my nature. But we have very different personalities, like we were saying, and like Bobby brought up, Brian brought up. Personalities are important. I'm very detail oriented. You guys may or may not mock me on the analytical side of my personality. He's much bigger, right? He looks at the total picture. He looks at the 350 people underneath him that, as one whole, whereas I'm kind of picking apart the nuances of each group. That's what makes us work, right? And that's where I might be able to come in and refine something just a little bit, have the uncomfortable conversation or whatever conversation it may be, right? Sometimes it is comfortable. And we solve a problem with a little tweak, right? And I think that's really important with even the process, right? I rely on a lot of other city agencies. Well, the other city agencies aren't sitting there waiting for Chief McCarthy to send them an email or give them a call on how we're going to fund something, or how, we have to do a joint thing with Public Works and things like that. Being in this position, you're constantly at the mercy of others, whether it's up or down, and you have to accept that. And I think the key to success is slowing it down, accepting that you can't change everything. You can't change the world. Like we always said, you can't turn a ship on a dime because it's going to flip over, right? Once you come to accept that, you actually get a lot more momentum and a lot more done. It just takes time, right? One of the expressions I say I'm going to put it on a t-shirt. I haven't yet. Every day I come in and I build a sandcastle, and every night the tide comes in and washes the sandcastle away, and I got to come back the next day and build a new sandcastle, right? That's what it feels like in this position, but I accept that, right? I could have been a florist, but I chose to be an assistant chief, right?
You have to repeat the sandcastle thing when Bobby comes back, because that just sums up everything. You're a sandcastle builder.
That's what the chief's office shirts should say, sandcastle builders, because you're only as good as the sand that you use today, right? And it crumbles quick, and you're saving things. Another piece of advice, just to piggyback that I gave to somebody the other day, was I always want people, when they bring me to a problem, to bring me at least a solution. And the solution can be totally wrong. I mean, it could be the most moronic, dumbest idea that they've ever come up with, but don't come to me as an excuse factory or a problem factory, right? I tell the battalion chiefs, deputy chiefs that are underneath me, like, dude, just give me something to work with, right? Like, I'm not saying I'm going to go with it, but, you know, don't just be in a factory for problems. And I try to do that too. So anytime I bring a problem up or out, I always bring it with additional information. I never just throw the grenade and run away. And I think that's garnished, given me some of the additional respect that you have to have in this position, because now it's not just about the firefighters respecting you, it's about everybody you interact with. So like, we have a regional hazmat team. I have to interact with the regional hazmat team, right? So I have the respect of 14 other communities that are part of our regional hazmat response area, right? So as a private, as a lieutenant, as a captain, as a battalion chief, you're not going to those meetings, you're getting the memos that come after those meetings. Now I'm the one in the meetings, you got to be on that team too, right? So there's a lot more to it than I think most people realize, right? And it's not all glory, I can assure you that. You have to accept that pretty quick.
I think the patience is a huge thing. Sorry, PJ, it's just dovetail that as coming from the shift, most of your stuff was done in that period of time, right? Like whatever you had to do as a line captain, even a battalion chief, typically was completed within your tour, and you didn't have to see long-term big projects to fruition. And I can tell you, from a guy that has about zero patience, that's me. This is very challenging, coming from a fire district to a municipal form of government. I can see why people think government. It's a slow process. And, to Justin's point, I mean, no one's sitting around waiting for Brian to call and say, hey, Brian, do you got any requisitions you want to enter today? Or is there anything we can buy for the fire department? It's, hey, when I call and they're like, yeah, we'll put it on the list of things to do today. It may be 2 weeks before I hear something back. In that 2 weeks, I'm getting better at it, but I wasn't used to that. And I think that's to your point of the sandcastle. I think that's so true, is you're literally coming in and just like, okay, what's going to happen today? Let's, maybe today's a 2-turret sandcastle that's going to get torn over tonight, and tomorrow we can mail 3, just trying to add. But it's like, I do think that patience in these jobs is absolutely critical, and probably to my detriment early on doing this thing.
So I'm just going to jump in because, Bobby's not here for him to hear my answer, but he put in the chat after my comment of, I feel the number 2 is a harder position than number 1. He said, why do I think that? And it may be because of the type of department that I came up in, which may be similar to yours, or it may not be similar, and it may be similar to Bobby's or not. But being in the middle, you're the sounding board from both the top down and the bottom up, and you're in the middle, and you have to give everybody their time at the table to bring their problems and hopefully their solutions to you, even though that regardless of what they're bringing to you, the chief isn't going to adopt, because you already know the chief's opinion, but you're not going to sell out the chief to the troops. So you're going to give the members the ability to vent their frustrations, to bring their problems, to bring their fixes to the problems. And the chief may have already told you a month ago, hey, listen, next month we're going to push this out, and this is the way we're doing it. And you may have pushed back a little bit. He or she may have swayed a little bit, but you already know how it's going to be from the chief's office. But in my department, 44 career staff positions and, maybe 40, 45 active volunteers, and they all have a better way. And you still have to give them that opportunity. So you're still listening to them. You're still giving them their opportunity to voice their problems, their concerns, and their solutions. But yes, so you also are not selling out the chief. And that's a very difficult spot to be in. Yeah, the chief has to answer to the command staff, to the politicians, to the council. But I think that's very, very different than dealing with all the members of the department and being in the middle. If you're in a position that I was, where I was in the union, I think that's another added problem, that makes it even a little bit more complicated and convoluted situation to be in, because and I'm glad I was in the union. Being outside the union, there's some benefits to that, but being inside the union, you have a lot of protection, especially at that, that chief level. But it also adds to the problems when you're trying to accomplish things that the chief wants to roll out that, may or may not be strictly in line with your CBA.
Now, Brian, one thing that I see a lot of is that, and Justin and I laugh about this all the time, is that we talked about how people see you that worked with you, whether you did the dishes and, whether you were a good firefighter or not. But then there's another group that came on the job when you were already the assistant chief or the XO. And for those individuals, they believe that you were born as the assistant chief. It's kind of like when you're a kid and you see your teacher in the grocery store for the first time and you're like, well, what is she doing here? And why isn't she in the classroom? So how do you work with that, with those individuals that just see you as the assistant chief? And I see a lot of the assistant chiefs actually undermine their own authority by simply how they look and how they dress. And I'll give you one example. We had a chief of operations pull up to a high-rise fire with a black and red plaid shirt on. And at the command post, they said, "Chief, I got 3 bales of hay coming." And he's like, "Well," I go, "I think we're having a hoedown." And but what it conveyed to the people that thought he was born as the assistant chief, it conveyed to them that he didn't trust them and that he had to respond to this high-rise fire because he was so important. He didn't have time to shave. He didn't have time to put on that shirt to actually look professional in his role. And it's a mistake that I think a lot of chiefs make, is they think it's cool that they show up to a fire scene in sneakers instead of taking the time to either get dressed or look appropriate. Can you kind of weigh in on not diminishing your own command?
Yeah. So, speaking of uniforms, I work with a fire chief that's very strict on uniforms. He is on spring break this week, and as am I, with a polo shirt on. Normally, we would be in ties. He's a big admin tie guy.
Well, you look professional, though. You look very
professional. No.
Yeah.
And we did training this morning. So if I'm doing training, I wear a polo shirt, and he's good with that. And so,
well, luckily you're not on, Fire Engineering Live Google Hangout today, so he won't see what you're dressed like.
You can see me, and I'm sure later on I'll get a text from him and be like, "Hey, if I see that again, it'll be a little bit of write up for you." No, I think you're right, though. I think you have to entrust and empower your people. I am very fortunate here at Kirkwood. We got 9 captains that basically run the operations with me, and I trust their judgment on calls. And so, there's no need for me to come blaring to a call or come crazy to a scene. When I show up, I ask them what they need. Don't try to immediately take over. There's times when they're got their hands full and, do those sort of things. But I think that's a huge thing is, trust is a two-way street. You got to trust them to have them trust you. And I think that goes a long way. And I think those conversations with them, I always, I've said it before, but like you lead in a firehouse to manage a fire ground. And I think those relationships that you build with your firefighters, your company officers, as the operations chief, inside those firehouse walls, having conversations, doing what's right, actively participating in training, not just always leading training, coming out, checking on how things are going. What are you guys thinking? What do we need to do as an organization? Then when we get to the fire ground and, either you take over or you implement some type of different tactic, they trust you because of everything you've done prior to. I know it's probably a little bit off on what maybe the question was a little bit, but I think that's important too, is, that trust factor amongst your troops. You're never going to be successful as a number 2 guy. And then your chief won't be successful either. I hate to say it, but like guys could not trust the fire chief, but as long as they trust their guy that's running the operations, I think you could have a successful organization. And not that the guys don't trust Silverdale. I'm just saying that, I think a lot more is weighed on the guy that's making the day-to-day decisions than, the fire chief, who's kind of the head of the organization, the department head, if you will. And I don't know if Justin would agree with that at all, or the thought process.
Yeah. So I would agree with a lot of that. Loyalty is key, right? But it's loyalty in both directions. So you got to be loyal to the organization. You got to be loyal to the people below you that have either watched you come up or maybe worked under you as an officer or what have you. And then you have to be loyal to your chief and to your community, right? So you're in this loyalty sandwich that gets very difficult because it's very hard to stay loyal to multiple people, right? And it's also difficult to stay loyal to people who have different opinions or different goals, right? So the chief and the union might have different goals, but in my position, I have to kind of stay loyal to both because I have to keep the respect of the union to keep the conversations moving, right? I meet with them every week. Sometimes it's easy, sometimes it's not, right? but I have to keep that loyalty and respect towards them. But at the same time, understand that the mission is that I work for the chief works for the mayor, and so on and so forth, right? I don't have to go through the whole city government with you, but I think there's a lot to be said that, the troops need to look up and at least see light up there, right? They may not, like in our organization, we're I don't want to say we're chief heavy because we're not, but I have 8 battalion chiefs underneath me, 4 deputies underneath me. There's another assistant chief who handles strictly operations, myself, and a chief. They need to look up and see light somewhere, right? They can't just look up and see darkness. So as a result, yeah, I mean, you might not get along with everybody, but I expect everybody to respect the ranks. And you have to give them something to respect them. You can't just expect them to look up and say, oh, he's the assistant chief, so it's the end all be all. You kind of have to, there's got to be proof in the pudding, and you gotta have a little bit of face time. You gotta, one of the things I hear people say is, oh, the chief of department doesn't come to firehouses, but yet the chief of department in my job, right, Alston, he's at fire scenes constantly. It's 3 degrees. Do you want the guy coming and saying, hey, nice job, when it's 3 degrees at 2 a.m, right, with icicles on his helmet, just like you? Or do you want him to stop by the firehouse and give back massages? Like, I never understood that.
They
Right.
want back massages. They want and that's in every department across the country. Firefighters want to see their leaders. The difference is they go to work in one firehouse and they don't realize that even in a mid-sized department like New Haven, you got 10 firehouses. That's 40 firehouse visits to hit everybody. So they don't realize that. They just can't reconcile that in their mind. So it's important for the chief to try to show up. One thing that I recommend the chief officers do is you always get stuck in your office. Oh, and you're working harder than anybody's ever going to appreciate. You're working your heart out. Try to end your day so you can actually see your family, but try to end your day in a different firehouse. Just leave work half hour early and stop at a firehouse and end your day. You're going to get out of work, at a reasonable time, but you can also stop by and visit. You're not going to hit all 40, but it's kind of a nice way to show up. My father used to say, if you're in a position of leadership and you're invited to something, show up to everything and then leave early enough so they can talk about you behind your back. Brian, weigh in on that?
No, I agree. I just wish I could have a 30-minute conversation at a firehouse. If I stop at a firehouse, it's, 30 minutes would be the short time. And most of it's an hour and 20 minutes of just, hey, this, and this. And, to your point, our guys were just talking about, hey, we never see the fire chief. We never see the fire chief. And then, at the end of the day, I'm like, well, because he's the fire chief. Like, that's not his job to kind of, I don't mean to be like condescending of that. And he's visible and he goes around, but he goes to city meetings. He's got, different stuff he goes to, department head meetings for the city, mutual aid meetings, all the things that, associate with the fire chief that are, I don't worry about because it's not my job. But I think to your points is, it's easy to try to say we're going to end the day, but there's always things that come up. And, if I left at 4:00 and said, hey, I'm leaving at 4:00 to go to a firehouse, the only thing that would stop them from, talking would be, if dinner showed up and at 5:30, but I try to make it around to the stations. I do think that's important to be a visible leader. I think that's critical, but I also think too that, I would challenge the captains, like, well, how many times do you get to the other stations with your crews? Well, what do you mean? Well, you got your jobs to do. We got our jobs to do. And, they co-ascend each other, but there's a lot of stuff that goes on that it's not always possible every day to stop somewhere and make that happen.
I want to hit on 2 comments on the Facebook Live, both from Nick Salome. His first one says, it's important as folks move up the chain to remain a student, but also be a teacher. Folks under you may aspire to be an officer or leadership role. Don't be that person that says, because I said so. Provide some insight as to how you come to your decisions so people just want to understand the why. Then he went on to continue to say, don't complain for the sake of complaining. Complain with an intention of bringing a realistic solution to influence positive change. Those are just 2 comments by Nick in the Facebook page. So we'll kick it back to Chief Hall, and I just want to offer one suggestion thing that I've done here at the Academy, which is very different from the firehouse, but yet very similar. When I took over this position, not being from the Academy, with a staff of about 200 adjunct instructors who I did not know, I had a goal of meeting with every single one of them. giving their opportunity to come in, face-to-face meeting, tell me what they like about the academy, what they don't like about the academy, and what they think we should be doing next. Not all 200 took me up on that opportunity, but many have. And the way I manage that and the way I'm continuing to manage that is continuing to encourage them coming in the second time, third time, some of them, 4 or 5 times, is through a scheduling app. So they can actually go right into my Outlook and schedule a meeting, 30-minute, 60-minute, or an hour and 20-minute or 120-minute meeting right on my calendar. So there's none of that, hey, are you available tomorrow, back and forth through email, hey, I want to come in and chat with you. Yeah, I don't have firehouses to go out to. I go out to visit a lot of our classes that are being delivered and check in with them, before the class starts or during lunch. But to give them that opportunity to know that they can always come to me and they can easily go to this link that's in my email signature and see when I'm available and schedule it. And it's on my calendar and we're good to go. So I don't know if that would help anybody out there in their positions, but it's worked in this role and it continues to work for the last 8 months very well. So we're going to throw Chief Fulton right back into it. He had to step away there for a phone call because we are getting close to that 2 o'clock minute time. And I know that he always has good insight for us. So Chief, we've just been talking about, some of those challenges. I gave the best answer that you could have ever heard on why I thought the assistant chief was harder than chief's position. Sorry you missed it. So I know you asked me to elaborate on that.
I was kind of listening while I was talking to one of my bosses. So we have so many things. I have so many plates in the air right now. I feel like, remember Jojo Gigo on the Ed Sullivan show? Ladies and gentlemen, right now, from the Moscow Circus, Jojo Gigo. Her name was got to be spinning 8 plates and all that good stuff. I'm that guy. Yeah. So, but some really great comments. One of the things about the XO, dead serious, is that like we can all complain up, right? All officers complain up. You don't complain down. You complain up. Right. So you don't air your dirty laundry. You don't whine about the boss to the folks underneath you. You whine up. Right. And the neat thing about the XO position is you get to be the confidant to the boss, because when you're the fire chief, there's only one person that you can whine to, and that's your XO. Because you can't whine to the mayor and the city council. That doesn't work. In other words, that person's generally set up in such a way that their bosses are the politicians, the decision makers. And so they don't get that kind of privileged communication that we get with one another, right? So if I'm your fire chief, or Jim's your fire chief, Brian, or John's your fire chief, Justin, he has to feel comfortable enough to walk in your office and say, can we go get a cup of coffee somewhere? Because, he has to let his head explode. You know what I mean? And you got to make sure that you've got their 6, that it goes, you let them have that 5 minutes, you let it go. Because if people don't have that outlet, you can get very unhealthy very quick. Everybody needs to have a place to let that go. And the XO needs to be that person who can just say, okay, I hear you, I hear you, I hear you, I hear you. And then try to help them unravel it. Because oftentimes our emotions become so intertwined with our perception of ourselves, of the organization, that we need that outside person who says, well, chief, I don't think they really meant it that way. That vote of no confidence that came out, 99% of the guys think you stink. There's a guy out there who likes you. Let's hold on to that. There's a guy. So you know what I mean? You need to be that guy, right? Because we've all been there. And if when you're the boss, get a dog, because it's not a popularity contest. And the chiefs that want to be loved quickly find out that's not how it works. And I knew some of the most loved fire chiefs in the world. They still had their critics. They still had their folks that had no kinship with them. So I think that the two things is that if you're going to be the XO, make sure you admire the person you're working for enough that you can be their backstop and their safety net when they need you, that you can be their heavyweight when they need you to, that you can agree to disagree and yet support them, And I think that if you can do all of those things, be the XO, you know what I mean? If you can't, you got to really think it through. right? If you think if it's just a notch in your belt on your way to the puzzle, the top of the puzzle palace, good luck with that. But, and I know none of you guys are, but I mean, it's a fascinating deal. And then look at how the structure is and how much control you have over it. I just want to take a minute to thank our sponsor and let folks know that if you have signed up for HOT, and there are apparently about 350, 400 of you who've paid for your HOT but have yet to select your HOT classes, please do so, because we've got a dozen or so classes that are already sold out. So your options are going to become really limited really quickly if you don't. So nozzle forward and a whole bunch of things are sold out. So please, get your stuff in now. And for FDIC, it's just a show. I didn't say the name. Oh, Peach sent me mention FDIC. You didn't say the name. Did I say FDIC enough? FDIC, the conference, FDIC. So, we're only about 4 weeks out. It's going to be a blast. Things are filling up. Firefighter Cancer Support Network. The run is on Thursday night. Please come out and run or walk or buy a T-shirt like PJ does and then walk around, pretend you ran. So I'm just teasing you.
Just don't get beat by a kangaroo.
Don't get beat. Remember the kangaroo? Remember the kid from Australia?
I tried to catch him and I couldn't catch him. And I'm like, I can't catch a guy running with shoes like this.
In a kangaroo suit. Yeah. Shrimp on the Barbie. Stop, Drop, Rock and Roll with our good friends of the National Fallen Firefighters is on. It's going to be great this year. They got a wonderful band. Stair Climb is on for Friday. Another great event. The folks from the Combat Challenge are doing a backyard barbecue on Friday. The Fool's Bash is on Wednesday. It's going to be outside at the Pan Am Center, not inside the building this year. We're going to be outside on that big plaza with tents. You've got the block party from MSA is on for Thursday night also. You've got, holy mackerel, you got the Union Party on Friday night, which is always a great time. Opening ceremony, some wonderful speakers. You got Dan Shaw from Traditions Training. You've got Doug Mitchell. You've got Dave Page and Frank Viscuso. So some wonderful people. Joe Netter, who you guys all know. Joe is going to get the Instructor of the Year. And Lifetime Achievement's going to go to a guy. I saw him on TV one time playing. He played the role of John Salka on Chicago Fire. And he did it really well, probably because he was John Salka. But it's kind of funny. He played himself, and he was very convincing in the role. He really was. You would have thought John was in the room. So John Salk is going to get Lifetime Achievement, and he's just such a wonderful guy. I can't wait to see that happen. It's going to be just an absolutely great show. It is just, we're going crazy with folks signing up, so it's going to be just packed. And thank all of you for participating and helping. And one of the bad things about being an XO, if your chief speaks at FDIC every year and teaches, sometimes you're the guy who has to stay behind and keep the candles lit. But I don't know what's going to happen in Kirkwood, because you and the chief are coming, Brian, right? You guys have to figure that one out.
Well, we'll make it work.
Huh?
We'll make it work. We always do. We did last year, and yeah, we make it work.
No, I did. Trust me. If the organization can't survive without the XO and the chief being out of town for a couple of days,
yeah, there's a
that's
problem.
a problem. That's a problem. That's a real problem. Plus, you're close enough that in America today, you're 4 hours away from home, no matter where you are. So. But thank you so much to everybody who is coming to FDIC. For those of you who want to teach and didn't get picked up for this year, the call for presentations will be opening up in April. So please get your paperwork in early. And the number one key to getting selected is to have them written for fire engineering or Firefighter Nation or GEMS or whatever. And also remember that this year you can pick up all the CAPC credits you need for your EMT license, your paramedical license. We have over 48 classroom sessions that have CAPC accredited, active shooter classes CAPC accredited for an 8-hour class, water rescues CAPC accredited. We have all kinds of classes that you can use for your paramedic license, your EMT license, your nursing certificates, anything that requires continuing hours. So we've got hundreds of hours available for you in CAPC credit. All you have to do is fill out your information, and when you get scanned, boom, you're good. So we got that going on. GEMS Games is going to be Friday morning, which is a great competition. We already have, I think, 10 teams signed up for the competition. So the 4 finalists will go on Friday well, the three finalists, the demo team goes first, the fourth place team, and then the three finalists will be competing on Friday morning. So that is a cool thing to see if you've never seen it. And that's the FDIC wrap up there in about 32 seconds. So, and I apologize, but thank you, PJ and Frank, for having me. It's always a pleasure. Justin, it's always great to see you. And Brian, I always like to give you guys a hard time because these are four of the finest gentlemen in the fire service, and I really mean that. These guys are great people, and you're doing great things. And it's interesting. It seems like really good fire chiefs attract really good XOs. Because Justin works for my good friend John, who's just a wonderful human being, and Brian works for my good friend Jim, who's another wonderful human being, and Frank actually used to work for my good friend John, who Frank is okay human being, just kidding. So, but you know, and PJ, you know, you were an XO for a while before you were the fire chief, right?
So I was number 4. It was a deputy position.
So you were deputy, but down 4 slots. Okay,
Yeah.
And that's what we talked about earlier. That's why I always use XO, because assistants, deputies, chief assistant, deputy assistant chief. So if you say XO, everybody knows who you're talking about.
I think these guys are great, but historically, Jimmy Carter was an XO too. So, you know, just throwing that out there.
Yeah, but he's not the worst president we've ever had anymore.
No, he wasn't. His stock has gone up.
Way up. Yeah. Yeah. We got a new worst president. So anyway, all you guys, thank you so much. It was great seeing you. We'll see you in a couple of weeks. And remember, keep your stick on the ice. We're all in this together.
Thank you. That's it for Politics and Tactics today. Everybody have a great day.
Thanks, Chief.
everybody.
Thanks, Frank.
Thank you, guys.